Welcome everyone to the Teaching Edge podcast. Today, I'm thrilled to welcome Meghan Lawson to the Teaching Edge. Meghan is a dynamic educator, leader, and advocate of reimagining the classroom experience, known for her commitment to student-centered learning, teacher empowerment, instructional excellence, and storytelling. She's inspired countless educators to embrace innovative strategies and prioritize well-being. Meghan is the author of Legacy of Learning, Teaching for Lasting Impact, a book that offers practical strategies to help educators make their work more manageable and enjoyable. With a deep passion for creating meaningful learning environments, Meghan's work bridges the gap between research and practical application in education. I'm very excited to dive into her insights and experiences today. Welcome, Meghan, to the show.
Well, thank you so much for having me. The intro was, I'm sitting taller. You are building up your guests. You make us sound so good. I appreciate that.
Well, I really think it means a lot, and in fact, I haven't mentioned, and I'd like to congratulate you on a new podcast that I just recently found that you've just started. I think this month, as we're recording this, which is a very inspiring topic, which is hope. I think it's called Hope Amplified, right? With you and Sean Gillard,
Yeah.
and I listened to it, and it's really wonderful. Maybe it's a good point to start because I was really drawn to this concept of hope as a strategy. So I think we can start there. I think it's a very good topic, and it really relates to many other things that you've been writing about, speaking about.
I love that you want to start here. I don't know if being on a hope kick is a thing, but I've been on a hope kick for some time now because a couple years ago, I didn't know that hope was a science. I didn't know the science of hope was a thing. And I've read a few books and talked to a few people who are in that space. And I think it is very applicable in the field of education to be talking about the science of hope more. So, and yes, I'm very excited about the podcast with Sean Gaylord, Hope Amplified, dear friend of mine, such an incredible principal. So it's just fun to learn with somebody that you enjoy and respect so much. So shout out to Sean if he's listening. So hope is essentially a word that we often conflate with wishing. We often say, I hope this happens, or I hope you have a good day, or I hope you have a good holiday. But really, that's a wish. Hope is very action oriented, and the definition of hope is essentially that hope is the belief that tomorrow can be better than today, and we are the ones who can make it so. And there's an original researcher. C.R. Snyder is one of the more famous names that has been in this space researching hope. And then since then, other authors, like the authors of Hope Rising, those researchers I've become more familiar with since learning about C.R. Snyder's work. But he would say that there's three components of hope: goals, pathways, and then willpower or agency. And that if we have clear, meaningful goals about where we personally are trying to go, and we can see multiple pathways to get there, then we're able to be more resilient in the face of challenge because we then can view obstacles as opportunities. And his research is pretty compelling about the power of hope. Hope is actually a stronger predictor of future success more than any other measure. So that's more than ACT, SAT score, grades, GPA. And in a study of college freshmen, kids who were higher in hope were more likely to come back in the second semester than kids that were lower in hope. And hope was actually that stronger predictor about that second semester more than grades. But I think the thing that inspires me the most about hope, I have a pretty high adverse childhood experience score of about a 7 out of 10. And, I didn't even know that term ACE until the last few years as we all grow to become more familiar with, trauma-informed practices. But I think I'm pretty high in hope. And it turns out that while trauma can actually break down someone's DNA, impacting our learning and our, resilience, it turns out that hope can actually restore your DNA. And I think that's really empowering to think about, that you're actually changing your DNA through hope. And while many kids may be struggling with hope in the classroom, teachers can actually lend kids their hope but only if they themselves have hope to give. And so I believe it's very important that we take great care of educators, right? One of the best ways to take great care of students and their learning is to take great care of staff and their learning. And I think the last thing I would say about all of that is that while my expectations for learning are high, my expectations for how we treat each other are even higher.
Wow, that's really wonderful. And actually, I believe that if you would you say that hope is a predictor better than other factors, then I believe that if teachers actually look at this as one of their goals for their own students before the rest of tests and everything else, I think that could make a great impact according to what you say.
Oh,
Because
absolutely. Absolutely. And, I failed to mention Jamie Mead, who's the former vice president at Battelle for Kids. She's the first person who introduced all this research as a part of a learning session that I was in. And a lot of the things that I said are quotes that, from videos that I've watched of hers and otherwise about the research on hope. But something else that she said that I'll never forget, as you mentioned, teachers and how they take care of kids and their learning in the classroom. She said two things. One, as an English teacher, she always thought my role is to help kids read and write really well. That's what I'm focused on. Like, I'm focused on my content and making sure we can get these kids there. And she said she wishes she could go back and say, no, that's actually not it at all. Like, English, reading and writing skills are a vehicle to supporting kids for success in the future and their future beyond school. And she said she wishes that she would have thought of that to find those ways to make the learning really meaningful for her students. I'm sure she was an excellent teacher and she's not given herself enough credit. But she said that often we mistaken hopelessness as laziness. And I think that that's an important reframing for a lot of us as we work to center the humanity of all people, adults and students alike. Everybody is or was somebody's kid.
Yeah. And I really think you mentioned goals and pathways and willpower. I think I can think about myself or about anything in any topic or any subject or anything in life. I think if we have a goal and we see a pathway and we are motivated to do it, then there is no chance of being lazy. I think it's all these factors just drive us to get things moving forward and get things really in motion. So yeah, I think it's great to see all of these things connecting together. Now, eh, how do you see this tied into educational leadership? So what is the main message to educators about their own professional growth and their instructional excellence? What do you see a good path for a teacher?
I think that part about being clear about where we're headed is important, both instructionally and why the learning matters for students, but also then connecting to more meaningful goals for our students. So getting to know them as individuals and how do we connect their interests and their curiosities with the learning standard that we know we also need them to matter. It's yes and it's not one or the other. And so I think, but people create what they experience, as Katie Martin says explicitly in one of her chapters from Learner-Centered Innovation. She says there's a whole chapter titled "Teachers Create What They Experience," and it's very true. You can't give to others that which you don't have for yourself. And so I think it's important as educational leaders that we model the kinds of practices we're hoping to see in the classrooms, and that includes tapping into the individual interests and strengths of every teacher. I think we do a lot of this or that in education. It's all this one way or it's the other way. And I think there's a lot of yes and we can embrace the ampersand, as Tanny McGregor would say. And so I think we can have some things that are pretty consistent across classrooms, while also having a lot of freedom then to tap into the individuality and individual talents and strengths that every teacher brings into our school ecosystem. And I think that's one of the beautiful challenges that we have, that we're facing in education. I don't think some elements of standardization are going anywhere, but it doesn't mean that we can't find some really creative ways to tap into the individual too. And I think that that's a fun design challenge right now for all of us.
So what would be an example of that?
Well, here an example I would consider would be, I work a lot in the curriculum space, and that's where some of my background has been and some of the roles that I've been in. So a lot of times, when teachers hear about curriculum work, they hear all of their autonomies going out the window and that everything is going to be completely standardized and scripted. And there's the fear that we're turning people into robots. And I really think we can embrace the art and science of teaching. So an example might be that we have more collective autonomy in some spaces. So really teachers need to be at the table, groups of teachers need to be at the table, organizing their standards and what does mastery look like and the order of their units and but then there's some room for, what are some anchor texts in the ELA classroom that we all believe are important for kids to experience that are, complex and appropriate for their grade level. And where is there some choice for individual student choice in that space or literature circles, and where might there be some variation across classrooms? And if I think there's this autonomy matching game that I really love. It's funny, I've never gotten into this on a podcast before. I love your question, and you definitely dig deeper, and that's special. So Eric Twaddell is a superintendent, or at least last I kept track of him, he was a superintendent in the Chicago area, and he also works for Solution Tree. He's an author. And he used to do this autonomy matching game where you list curriculum, instruction, assessment, and grading on one side of the paper. And then you have some, none, or all. And then you ask groups of teachers to draw the arrow according to, do you think you should have some, none, or all autonomy with curriculum and instruction, assessment, grading, and it leads to a really rich dialogue. I think at the root of curriculum work and the art and science of teaching is expectation management, right? Helping us all, because expectations breed emotion, and a lot of times people think, well, I'm going to lose all of my autonomy, and the reason my autonomy matters to me is because I want to be fully responsive to my students. And if I have to be exactly like the teacher next door when she has a different group of students, then you've taken that away from me. Well, in the autonomy matching game, a lot of times we get to the place where we're all learning about instruction together, but at the end of the day, you have full autonomy to respond instructionally to the students that are in front of you. And what that could lead to is, as you kind of map out, some of the curriculum work, which is really organizing standards, organizing units and things like that, it really should all be in service of lifting the dialogue and supporting the dialogue that groups of teachers can have about teaching. That's all it should be about versus top-down management. It's really about elevating dialogue and collaboration. But if you're connected on, what does mastery look like? How are your students doing versus my students? Then if you're doing exactly what I'm doing, our conversation probably isn't going to be a very rich dialogue, because we're either just going to be affirming that we're all struggling right now, or we're going to be affirming that what we did was great, which there's some merit in that. But if you're doing something a little bit different than I'm doing, and your students performed really well on that thing that we created to measure mastery, well, now I'm really interested in learning more from you. And I think the best learning is by teachers for teachers.
Yeah. And, I think, as I'm thinking, listening to you, I think when someone starts to ask different questions, they get better answers. So this question, where can I be autonomous in curriculum, in instruction, in assessment, in grading, it will definitely bring new answers, because you've asked the question. And actually, you mentioned another important point of maybe I don't just ask myself, but I ask other teachers, how have you done it? And I'm sure there are just amazing ideas that come up, and then suddenly the curriculum doesn't look as something that's very, very strict and confining, but rather like a framework to work in. So it's really thinking from a different angle, a different direction. Now, if we switch it now to the student, if we look at sometimes it's called student-centered learning, but you have ideas about how to involve the students and have them as part of this. So if you can expand on that, that would be excellent.
Oh, sure. So I write about this a little bit in Legacy of Learning. I think if I could go back, so I clearly taught English because I keep giving you English examples. I taught seventh
Yeah,
grade English and then high school. But when I taught seventh grade English, it was around the time when the DeFores were becoming more well known and popular. As far as learning that educators were doing in schools. Marzano's work, some of us were becoming more familiar with it at that time. And there was a big push for clarity about what am I learning today, or what skills am I supposed to master in this lesson today. And so we had this push for providing clarity about what our kids supposed to know and be able to do, and make sure the students knew that, not just write the standard on the board or write it in kid-friendly language, but also like our kids had well, then we were very paper focused, right? There wasn't as much tech.
yeah,
And they would draw themselves a little bar graph, and they would shade in with the learning target how far they were to mastery on there, and that's great because kids knew where they were in the pursuit of the goal. But if I could go back, I think I would have, and this is what I made note of in Legacy of Learning, I would have celebrated more of the progress toward the goal. I also would have maybe tried to connect with more of their interests if possible, to try to find that personally meaningful goal that I talked about based off of hope. I think there could be like a intersection between, yes, I'm, uncovering what the main idea is of this, but also I'm really interested in solving this particular problem right now in the world, and how might knowing this, how to do this with uncovering the main idea, help me when I'm doing research towards solving that problem, and just helping them sort of tap into the personally meaningful part of the learning experience. But the brain is more motivated by how far we have come than how far we have to go. And so that's what I reflect upon in Legacy of Learning, is that, yes, it was great that they knew where they were headed, as far as how close am I to mastering the goal. But I should have placed more emphasis on, okay, so you're 50% to mastering this learning target. Like 50% is great progress. That's more than 0%. And I should have taken more opportunities to celebrate with kids so that I could also use that as a motivator. I mean, motivation is very internal and intrinsic, but allowing them to see, like, I'm making progress, my behavior matters, the choices I'm making matter, which is propelling me forward. I'm going to keep putting that same kind of energy in, or even more, to see how far I can go for the last part of mastery on this particular target. So I would say that might be one example of how this might
yeah.
practically apply.
When you hear students asking, and this is a common question, they may not ask the teacher, but they ask it all the time. Why do I need this at all? So how would you answer that? This is not going to be useful for me in life later on. Maybe this is asked more of mathematics, maybe than English, but it's still a very common question.
It's so funny you say that about math, because that's exactly where my head went to. But I was more drawn to the humanities side as a teacher, since I was an ELA teacher. But I often found myself wondering that about math. And to be really honest with you, I did learn some math that I can't think of an example when it was the last time I used it.
Yeah.
So I guess I would have actually put this question out to your listeners. Like, if you're a math teacher, I want to understand how you're helping students see that the math is really applicable.
So if I were
So,
to ask you as a student the same question about English, do I really need to know how to analyze texts? You can take it in any type of.
yeah, so I think I have a great example that just happened probably 15 minutes before we jumped on this call. I received a text message that my Apple Pay had suspicious activity on it. And the text looked very official, right? Even click on this URL, and that in itself looked very official.
Yeah.
But something told me like that, they're not putting the last couple digits of the card on this text, or they're not, giving me enough information for me to know if this is a legitimate text message. So I didn't use the link that they provided. I reached out to Apple directly, and they let me know that this was indeed a phishing scam.
Yes.
Well, if I had not become a more critical consumer of reading, of text that I receive,
Yeah.
emails, I could have very likely fallen for that. And so I think maybe examples like that help students in the classroom just slow down for a second. And the age of everything's at our fingertips, we can move very quickly, get it, with the snap of a finger, we get whatever we need. It's important to slow down because one wrong move could have compromised my entire account.
Yeah. 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 Great example. Actually, I'm sure the kids would have their own answers as well
Oh,
of
absolutely.
of why they actually can benefit from what they are learning. And it very um, likely can be answers like that, or examples like that, or other things. But I think it's very intriguing because the fact is we don't get to use a lot of what we learn, but we do benefit from it. Um, Now, if you look at what got you into education, what really inspired you to become an educator? How did you get into this? And actually, you mentioned the ACE score, which I didn't know about actually until I listened to your first episode of the podcast. So I went online, I did my own assessment. You get asked a bunch of questions about your life. I figured out I had a perfect childhood because
Wow,
everything
good for
was
you.
no, no, no. I didn't experience this, didn't experience that. But yeah, but I can appreciate when people um, do experience all of it. They would they would find it harder to deal with life later on, and for you, you mentioned you did get a higher score, which is indicative of having these challenges. How does this bring you to education, or is it related at all?
It's a great question. I also just want to say I love that you said ask the kids, what examples they could think of. I think so often we think we have to have all the answers as the adult in the room, and asking kids to uncover why things matter is a great strategy for getting them more engaged. I So I did not have I don't have an inspiring start to education story like a lot of people do. And
Yeah.
I love the beautiful stories that people tell about whether it's my mom was a teacher or my dad was a teacher, or I wanted to completely reinvent education because school was hard for me. I didn't want to be a teacher. I actually wanted to be a Broadway dancer. I grew up classically trained dancer. I was very into competitive dance. And I was on that path, but my mom was a single parent and she was very practical, and she understood I didn't need a college degree to dance on Broadway. And so she, you know, required of me that I would go to a 4-year college, get a degree. And then when I was done with my degree that was not in dance, that I was welcome to, pursue that dream. And I didn't want to wait. Kids don't really like to wait for things. And so I said, well, maybe then I'll go into a different performance-based field. And so maybe I'll be a television broadcaster and I'll be on the local news, and it'll be a performance art, just a different one. And again, she's very practical. I know I'm making her sound like a dream killer. She's a lovely lady. But she said, you'll be sweeping the floors of the newsroom for a decade before they put you behind a camera. And I said, fine, I'll be a teacher. And I have to say that I grew into a passion for this beautiful profession. I didn't start with one, but I try to tell that story because I think too often we ask kids, what are you passionate about? And they're very young. And depending on if when you're young, you sometimes have limited experience with understanding what's out there, or what's possible, because depending on the family that you come from or the experiences that you've had, you have limited experiences, and experience leads to passion. And so for me, I had to experience our profession for a few years in order to become more passionate about this work. And it wasn't until I left the high school classroom and started teaching, and I was humbled by teaching seventh grade. I showed up on the scene thinking, well, it must be a lot like high school. They're just, younger. No, I mean, they're middle school teachers who might be listening. They're at a variety of developmental levels. They're like little puzzles to be figured out. But once you see that something you tried really worked for them, or that thing that you were struggling to make happen for a student happens, that becomes almost addicting. Like you become hooked on, okay, well, what else might I be doing that could be impactful for kids? And it's been a great opportunity for me to, I don't know, focus less on myself and focus on others, which is more rewarding in the long term. And so I'm where I'm supposed to be, but I found a very backwards way of getting here.
Yeah, it's different than what you call inspiring stories, but I think it's very inspiring because I think many times the only way to figure something out is when you actually do it, and you you might have found being a professional dancer is not all it's about after 15 years into it, and this happens all the time. But so I think it's a very good and realistic approach to try things out and see, because we don't really know ourselves what we will like and what we will be inspired by. And um, I like the analogy of little puzzles that need to be figured out. It's very, very nice. It's really that's really good. So yeah, that's I think that's it's a great story, and also a reminder. I heard this interview. I don't remember where it was. Again, another podcast that I listened to, but it was a long time ago, and they were speaking about. They were speaking about um, some technician or some kind of just uh, I think it was someone who worked at the city cleaning sewers or something like that. And he was so excited about what he was doing. And they were asking, how can you excited about cleaning sewage? And the concept was that you don't wait for passion for something, but you bring your passion into anything. And then it becomes so interesting. So it's many times the other way around. Maybe it's even more common that it's the other way around, rather than being inspired and then finding, this is what I was meant for. Just some random thoughts. Anyway.
No, I love that. I love that. Actually, I was, before I got into the science of hope, I was really getting deeper into the positive psychology research or the research on happiness. And Gretchen Rubin wrote this book, The Happiness Project, many years ago, where for an entire year, once a month, she would try a different strategy to see if it would make her happier. And one of the months, the strategy was, if you loved something when you were 10, you'd probably love it now. And so something that I write about in Legacy of Learning is there is a focus on personalization and tapping into student interests. And getting back to that, yes, and we can bring, things that we find interesting into the teaching space too. And so, for me, if I was really into dance and the performing arts, like how might I be bringing movement into the ELA classroom? And if I'm excited about it and I'm bringing that kind of energy into that space, it's a more lively environment for learning for kids. And so I think too often we kind of brush by that detail, and teachers might not realize that it's okay to bring things that are personally enjoyable for you into the classroom, because happy teachers lead happy classrooms. And, the brain on positive is 31% more productive than it is at negative, neutral, or stressed. As Sean Aker would say, that he's a happiness researcher out of Harvard.
So when you look at your own experience, do you find you bring this to the class? You also speak of storytelling. So Do you find as a teacher is a good strategy to bring these stories, your own stories or other stories, to the classroom in terms of, bringing them closer to the subject?
Yeah, I've seen some incredible, I'm working on my storytelling skills. I do think stories have the power to connect and unite us. When we're listening for stories, when we listen to a story, there's actually something that happens in our brain. It instantly calms us, and we start to feel more of a sense of safety, because often the brain can't understand the difference between threat to ego and threat to safety, right? So often when we're talking to people or we're talking to teachers, and especially people like myself, if I'm spending time with teachers, and just by nature of the title that I have as assistant superintendent, like already, I think that could be a little bit unnerving. Like, okay, well, here's this person who has this, lofty title. What is she, descending upon us to talk about today? When really I'm joining them to be a listener and to support the work. So, but when we do storytelling, whether I'm eliciting their stories or I'm telling them one of my own, it's a signal to the human brain that it's safe here. And this story, like I'm just, enjoying this person's story. It's not about me. They're telling a story. And I just think that that can do a lot for our learning and well-being in the classroom. And I think that's why I'm so big on not getting too hung up on villainizing one instructional practice over another, because to be honest with you, I know that there is, there'll be research about you should only talk for this amount of time, and then students should learn for this amount of time. And generally that's true. But I have to tell you, I've been into some really interesting social studies classroom where somebody is an artful, masterful storyteller, and the kids are with them. I'm looking around and they are with them, and they're probably talking longer than I could get away with talking if I was teaching that same lesson. But that person has this gift for making the history come alive
Yeah.
for kids. And I don't want to take that away. So I don't know. I mean, I just think that there's a lot of learning that can happen in story.
Yeah. And you said it's something you are working on. In fact, it is a skill. It's
Mm-hmm.
I really believe it's a skill. So which means it can be developed. And so someone might say, "No, I'm just good at delivering the material. That's it." But that's another skill. And if this skill draws the students closer and lowers their fear, and they feel safer, and they're in the story rather than how I'm going to do well on the test, then it's a different experience. Um,
Absolutely.
I see you read a lot. You mentioned many books. So a question I like to ask is if you could gift three books to every teacher, what might these be?
So I will really struggle with this question because I love so many books.
Yeah,
But what I would say is there's an article. I'll narrow it down to one article that I think is important, not
even
just for
better.
educators to read, but actually every person in the world, and it's very short. And the title of the article is Willing to be Disturbed.
Okay.
And I can look it up right now to see what the author's name is. I should have looked this up before I joined you. But essentially, what I love about this article is, okay, it's by Margaret J. Wheatley. And it's essentially just encouraging us to embrace not knowing. And I think there needs to be more room for curiosity and education, and how, like, it's a little sad that we have to say that explicitly, right? We're in the learning business, but there's much more, I don't know, emphasis or reward seemingly placed on knowing, like the confidence of knowing. But I think confidently not knowing is even more important, and to be a listener and to be curious, and to sit with things that conflict with our own understanding or beliefs. I believe that being better about that would actually help us change the world. Too often, I think we're listening to confirm what we already believe or know to be true. And we're really uncomfortable if somebody says something that really surprises us. And But I think we can actually embrace that discomfort and allow it to make us more curious. You know, you can have two people who experience the same professional learning day, the same book, this very podcast, and they could have two very different reactions. And instead of saying, well, that person's response is wrong, like it's this way instead, but instead become really good at asking really good questions to genuinely understand more so why that person is responding that way, I think would actually allow us all to find paths forward together, regardless of what space we work in.
Yeah. Great. So willing to be disturbed. Great.
Willing to be disturbed.
Excellent. I'll look for it. Great. Now, if we go back to speaking a little bit about the teacher's well-being, you said right in the beginning of our conversation that, you know, to bring, for example, hope to students, teachers need to be hopeful, and this all relates to their own well-being. In your approach, how should teachers take care of their own well-being?
I think too often things feel really big and overwhelming and daunting to us as educators. There's a lot that comes at us at any given time, sometimes whether it's from our own district offices, and I can, you know, say that as a district office leader, I, you know, continually try to work on, you know, being really thoughtful and not imposing more work upon teachers that's unnecessary, or it's your state or federal guidelines. So, you know, we have to figure out how do we control the things that we as teachers can control. And so often I know for me as a teacher, I really struggled with, well, I'm going to read all the books and I'm going to try all the strategies and I'm going to completely reinvent my classroom this school year. And well, that's not manageable. That's not sustainable. And so thinking more so in small steps that can make a big impact is really important. I read this book by Chris Field called A Billion Hours of Good. And essentially he says that if every person were to take 15 minutes a day to try to make the world a better place in a way that's personally meaningful to them, the world would change. And it's 1% of a 24-hour day is 15 minutes. And that got me wondering, okay, well, what's 1% of a school day? Well, 1% of a school day is roughly 4.5 minutes, give or take, depending on exactly how long your school day is. And so what might I, as a teacher, be able to do for 4.5 minutes that's going to make me a better educator and improve our school by 1%? And if I, you know, take some small strategies forward that only take roughly 5 minutes a day, and the teacher next to me does, and the teacher above me does, okay, well, that my 1% plus their 1% plus their 1%, well, now suddenly we're really getting places. 1% of a 50-minute class period is roughly 30 seconds. There's a lot that can be done in 30 seconds, even if it's simply choosing a student a day to personally connect with for those 30 seconds. And so I just think if we're able to remember some of the things that we know are good and true, that require actually very little planning, and we commit to those things for that 1% of our day, like greeting students at the door, using their name, making eye contact, getting excited at that door to tell them, you know, that you're excited to see them and you're excited about what you're going to do today. You know, there's an Edutopia article that would say that that's going to raise student time to task and engagement by 20% and decreases student discipline by 9%. That didn't require any more planning. Now, sure, sometimes we have to run to the restroom or grab those copies off of the copier, but you know, generally speaking, if we can make a commitment to some of those things that we've always known were good and true, I think we can make a big difference. It's just, and we all know what to do in some of those essential pieces, but the problem is so much comes at teachers that it's easy to forget the things that you know are good and true. And so quieting the noise to focus on some of those essential practices or the things that matter most, like the relationships, I think is our best path forward.
Yeah, I think it's really developing these as like new habits. And even you asking the question, I think anyone who's listening could pause and before continuing and really create an answer for this. What can I do 30 minutes, 30 seconds at the end of each class, for example? And then suddenly, maybe 1 month later, you've greeted all of the students individually a number of times, and a lot of things change just because of thinking about it and noticing it. And if you do it for a month, it might become a real habit. So it's a great example. It's really it's really
Well,
to the
and
point.
if
Yeah,
principals are listening, like Katie Martin says, teachers create with the experience. So how do principals, greet teachers at the door, greet them at the door of the
yeah,
PD experience that they're going to have that day or the staff meeting? How do teachers actually do that for each other? Because when we use each other's names and we get excited to see each other, we send the message that it mattered that you came here today. I'm glad you're here today. And in the age of chronic absenteeism, a lot of us are wondering what are we ever going to do to get kids to come to school? I'm not saying that this will cure it all, but I certainly would be more inclined to come to a workspace or as a student to a classroom if I thought someone was looking for me and was excited that I was going to be there that day.
yeah, yeah. Very likely, definitely. In terms of advice that you give, what would you say is the most uncommon piece of advice that you have given about teaching that more people should know about? Teaching
I
or
would
managing?
I would say as a recovering perfectionist, I really enjoyed John Acuff's work. And he has a quote where John Acuff says, if you have a goal, cut it in half. So a lot of times we set really big goals and they're almost impossible to achieve and the timelines that we think that we're going to achieve them. But if we cut the goal in half and we can see that we're making great progress toward a goal that's less significant, it's actually, again, back to that motivating the brain. The brain gets so motivated that we're more inclined then to actually exceed that goal and get even closer to the big ambitious one. And so I think it's counterintuitive, but because we're always told to dream big, and I think that's beautiful and important. But sometimes there's no fault in making the goal smaller.
Yeah, great, great. It's a great concept, and sometimes when we do this in our own time management, I find if you say I'm going to spend 3 hours in this, it's almost impossible. But if you say I'll spend 20 minutes on it, you might spend 40,
Exactly.
and 20 minutes flew by. Suddenly I'm focused, and I spent 20 minutes more, and it's yeah, it's a trick.
It is. It is. That's a
Yeah,
great example.
yeah, excellent, excellent. Um, okay, wonderful. Um, let's do a quick fire round of questions. Some of the topics we haven't even covered, and if you want, we can expand on them. But really, some questions with quick answers. Okay, so the teacher's role, is it becoming more important or marginal?
More.
More. Okay. Technology in education, has it made things better or worse?
Depends.
Okay. um, Education, should it be uniform and centralized or personalized and flexible?
Personalized and flexible.
Okay. What is the goal of education? Is it to prepare workers or inspire individuals?
It's both.
Okay, great. Um, well, I'm interested in your answer about technology. So let's ask about AI. Is it going to destroy education or improve it?
We'll see.
Okay, uh, great. Parents' involvement in education, should it be minimal or substantial?
I think it should be substantial.
Okay. Um, Standardized testing, is this essential or harmful?
You said, is it essential or is it
Harmful.
harmful? Depends.
Okay. Um, what should curriculum emphasize? Is it academic subject or life skills?
I'm going with life skills.
Okay. What about homework? Is it necessary or unnecessary?
I would say the research says, sorry, I know that these are supposed to be like fire off your answer, but the research would say
That's
that
okay.
it has a very small impact, but a more significant impact at the upper grades.
Okay, interesting, interesting. I didn't know that. Um, what about discipline? Should it be strict or lenient?
Restorative.
Okay. Um, and then grading. Should it be grading based on performance or effort?
Performance.
Okay. Um, all right, that's excellent. And I am interested about what you said. Depends or we'll see about technology. What have you seen so far?
Well, I think in some ways I feel like uh, I feel old sometimes when I talk in some aspects about technology. I mean, technology has done amazing things for, I mean, society and for the learning process. Our ability to give feedback faster when it comes to AI tools and otherwise. I mean, there's some really beautiful ways that kids are more tapped into information and resources, things that I didn't have as a student. And the fact that you and I are, not in the same area code, and we're
Right.
able to have this conversation, it's beautiful. Like we're using technology for connection. These are all great examples of things that technology can do both for learning and for our humanity. And the flip side of it is, I think it's okay to also take a break from our technology and have conversations with the people around us. And I think some of our students are getting less opportunity for human connection because of the ways that they're accessing and utilizing technology and at the frequency that they're doing so. And so for me, it's yes and.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, yeah, I'm sure that happens. And personally, I love technology a lot, and I use it a lot, and especially everything that's going on with AI. So I can see someone completely starting to rely on this and spend a lot of their time in all of these new technologies and less time on really creating real connections. So yeah, I can
I
agree.
know, I'm currently out of town and I'm overlooking a beautiful balcony, and I'm trying to take a minute to enjoy it. And I'm also wanting to capture pictures of it, right? And so I want to both have the pictures to remember, but I also don't want to forget how I felt sitting here and what it felt like to see it. And so that's why it's yes and for me. I'm so grateful that I can take pictures and I can talk to you right now while I'm on this trip and we're having this great conversation. Like those are examples of the ways that technology is enhancing my life. Um, and I also, when you and I hang up, I'll go and enjoy breakfast with the people that I'm here with. And I'll put my phone away and I'll know that my picture of this balcony is in my pocket. So that's why it's yes and for me.
Yeah, great. Now, I know these were quick questions, but if you can expand a little bit about the parents, because you said you think they should have substantial involvement. Um, why do you think that, and what should teachers do to make that happen? Because sometimes we as parents we feel okay, now the school will handle it uh, until we get the kid back.
Well, I struggled with that question because I was trying to do my best for as many of your questions as I could, that was a fun exercise to get us to really think about where we stand on something and think more deeply. But I struggled with picking either of those because I think, I gave you the example about how I was raised by a single parent.
Yeah,
Um, my mom was going to be involved at the level that she could be involved. And that wasn't a reflection on her interest in my education. That was a reflection on her capacity to take on anything in addition to her work and childcare and child rearing. So, I mean, I think substantial means different things to different people. I would love, but I think as a teacher, I always just try to remember that while I might be, the quote expert practitioner in the classroom, every family is more of an expert in knowing their student. They've known them longer than I have. They've been with them on their educational journey. And so tapping into understanding things that what experiences that the student has had or the family has had, and what strategies that have worked at home to engage students, or to support their well-being. Those are the kind of things that when I say substantial, I just mean too often I think parents feel like they're on the outside of the school, and the school experience. And for some of them, like they don't have the capacity, like my mom, to go very deeply other than maybe like a parent teacher conference or let me know if there's something that's wrong. But there are other parents who are looking for a more meaningful connection with teachers. And I think there is benefit in them getting to have substantial conversations, in a partnership versus, telling the teacher what to do, but just allowing each other to listen carefully on both sides of the table and move forward together in partnership for what's best for each student.
Yeah, yeah. I think it comes back to also your recommendation for willing to be disturbed. I think a teacher might feel that they know everything there is to know on how to take a student from point A to point B, but the parent might know better. They might have great strategies that work for that particular person, and they might have the answer. So it makes sense to ask and listen.
Yeah. I mean, they send us, their most precious person in the world every day. And so I don't think, and I think that they deserve to have a seat at the table for conversations about their students' experience. So I think that's why I chose the word substantial, because that's what they deserve if that's what they can take on as a parent. And if not, let's not judge that either. Let's understand that everybody is fighting battles we can't see.
Yeah, yeah, and to put some focus there might be part of this 1% that
I
you
like
spoke
that.
of
Nice full circle
before.
comment there. That's
Yeah,
good. Yeah.
yeah, it could very well be part of that. Meghan, this has been excellent. I really appreciate your time, and you've shared so much great ideas. Really, really wonderful.
Thank
It's
you
been
so
a
much
real
for having
pleasure.
me.
Let me ask you, people want to find more about you and your book, your consulting, speaking, everything that you do. Where can we find you?
Best place to find information about my book or my speaking. I mean, you can buy my book on Amazon, certainly, or Barnes and Noble, but I have a website, meghanlawson.com. So MEGHANLAWSON. You can also find me on X, formerly Twitter, at Meghan_Lawson, or Instagram, Meghan Lawson blog.
Excellent. Sounds great. Is there anything that I should have asked that I didn't?
No, this has been a really energizing conversation, and I think you are a masterful question asker, and that's inspiring me to ask more thoughtful follow-up questions in spaces that I'm in, because I do think that it helps us go deeper in the dialogue. So thank you for modeling that for me and for everybody listening. It's been
Thank
an
you. Thank you
honor.
so much. Thank you. Excellent. Thank you, Meghan, very, very
Thank
much
you.
for everything. And it's been wonderful.